regular meeting for the City Council, June 21, 2022. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Councilmember Alejandra Gutierrez.
Here.
Councilmember Stedden.
Here.
Councilmember Friedman.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Harmon.
Here.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez. Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
And Mayor Rouse.
Here. All right, we have a ceremonial item. Would you read the item, please?
Yes. Ceremony item, National Pollinator Week, June 20th to 26th, 2022.
Alrighty then. Hi there.
Hello.
This is National Pollinator Week, June 20 through 26, 2022. Whereas pollinator species, such as thousands of species of bees, are essential partners in producing much of our food supply, and whereas pollinator species provide significant environmental benefits that are necessary for maintaining healthy, biodiverse urban and suburban ecosystems, and whereas pollination plays a vital role for the trees and plants of our community, enhancing our quality of life and creating recreational and economic development opportunities, and whereas for decades, the city of Santa Barbara has managed urban landscapes and public lands that include many municipal parks and greenways, as well as wildlife habitats. And whereas the city of Santa Barbara provides recommendations to developers and residents regarding landscaping to promote wise conservation stewardship, including the protection of pollinators and maintenance of their habitats in urban and suburban environments. And whereas bees and other pollinators have experienced population declines due to a combination of habitat loss, use of pesticides, and the spread of pests and diseases. Now therefore I, Randy Rouse, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Santa Barbara, California, do hereby proclaim June 20 through 26, 2022 as National Pollinator Week in the city of Santa Barbara, and encourage members of the community to participate in pollinator-friendly living year-round, creating and supporting pollinator-friendly habitats. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I wanted to say a few words about bees, but first, I'm just very grateful to be here and excited about Pollinator Week, so thank you. Bees are essential to our environment and food supply. They are threatened by habitat loss, non-native invasive species, and a myriad of other threats. There are 16,000 different native bees in California, and native plants tend to support them better because they have evolved together. It takes all sizes and shapes and timing to make a match and achieve pollination. One of the most direct solutions to our climate biodiversity crisis lies within our ability to harness the regenerative power of native plants. For the past 9 years, we at the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden have been working with collaborators in the city of Santa Barbara and others across the region to better understand which plants and bees need each other so that we can better support all of these bees. We are ramping up our efforts to promote native plants in food gardens and in home habitats, and we hope you will join us. We are proud to be in this city and are pleased about this proclamation to protect bees within it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good. Madam Administrator, are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes, Mayor Rouse.
Okay. We will go to public comment. We have general public comment, 3 minutes at the podium each for items that are not on the agenda, but do fall within the purview of this council. So we'll start out with Eric Johnson, followed by Ricardo Fristock. Eric Johnson, please. And there's a little timer on the podium to let you know when your time is getting close.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. My name is Eric Johnson. I just retired from the City of Santa Barbara Public Works in October 2019 with over 30 years of service. The reason I'm here today is to speak to you about an incident that happened to me on June 22nd, 2020, which turned my life upside down. The incident saddens me every day of my life, and tomorrow will be 2 years when my dino was taken from me. The incident happened on the corner of State and Westcott Terrace next to the parking lot where we were sitting. All of a sudden, the animal control officer and PD shows up. Animal control officer stated they were there for a welfare check. The animal control officer went over to my dog Dinah, who was lying in a baby stroller that I made up so I could take her around with me wherever I went. The animal control officer walked over to my dog and less than 5 minutes walked back past me to her truck and only mumbled to me that my dog Dinah was dehydrated and would need to be put down, and I'd only have 2 hours to do this task. There was nothing said to me about able to take my dog Dinah to the vets and get checked, or even to rehydrate Dinah. The animal control officer wouldn't even talk to me. The animal control officer, in the animal control officer's mind, it was to put my dog Dinah to death. Check the camera on the footage of the PD officer on the site who was wearing a chest camera. The big issue I have is how can a Santa Barbara control officer have the authority to make this kind of determination when she's not even a licensed veterinarian? Veterinarians have to attend years of schooling and even do 3 years of residency to become a board-certified vet. The animal control officer also mentioned in the report that my dog Dinah had cancer, chronic kidney disease, and severe arthritis. This was never mentioned to me at any point. My dog Dinah has never had cancer or chronic kidney disease, but she cannot walk, do what's called hip dysplasia, which is very common in German Shepherds. That is why I made a custom baby carriage for my Dinah. I know Dinah was approaching the end of her life, and I was making Dinah as comfortable as possible. What I'm asking you guys today are to investigate on why my dog Dinah was put to death without first seeing a vet. How many other reports has this animal control officer lied to justify killing my dog? Does she have a track record? I think there was an injustice here. I'd like to see a new procedure set up where people are allowed to see a vet and let the vet make the determination about the welfare and care of animals. The new procedure would personally make me happier for the betterment and for the betterment of the public as a whole. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ricardo Frustock?
Good afternoon. Thank you guys all for your time today. Hello, my name is Ricardo Frustockel. I'm here with Emiliano Aurora and Carmen Flores. We are homeowners at 1212 Punta Gorda on the Lower East Side of Santa Barbara, also known as Holiday Park Mobile Home Complex / South Coast Housing, Inc. The following are some bullet points of information we would like to address with you. Number one, the mobile home complex is being represented to the public as a low-income, not-for-profit, owner-occupied housing complex. But we have information that the complex is slowly being bought up by a single family and that there are a few select individuals on top of this who are renting out their units for profit. Number two, the City of Santa Barbara, in conjunction with South Coast Housing, Inc., which is now known as Community Housing Corporation, and the state of California lent us money to set this complex up to be a homeowner-occupied cooperative. We were promised certificates in the nonprofit per the founding bylaws. To this day, we have not been issued these certificates. The acting board, number three, the acting board has let the nonprofit status lapse with the Internal Revenue Service due to not filing legal reports and paperwork necessary for more than 3 years in a row, while submitting other legal documents with individuals being named illegally as a secretary being on the board. Number four, the board and acting management have never made one single payment to the city of Santa Barbara for this loan in over 30 years, which has now led the loan to become in default. Your staff is now in the process of discussing the renegotiation of the terms of this loan. This is the perfect time for the city of Santa Barbara to step in and enforce original intentions for the park to become an actual low-income, non-profit, owner-occupied housing complex with fair representation for the individuals. Number five, the acting board is not in compliance with the founding documents for the current bylaws of either South Coast Housing, Inc. or Holiday Park Mobile Home Complex nonprofit. The individual owner-occupied tenants are not being fairly represented by this board because they are using proxy votes for units that are being rented out for profit through coercion and lack of understanding of nonprofit rules and regulations. In closing, I would like to ask the City Council to instruct its staff to include the conditions for the new loan agreement, A, that they require the corporation under the original bylaws in place when the project was first approved, and that a requirement that the city staff oversees the elimination of all subletting using a process similar to what's being developed by the Santa Barbara Housing Authority to return the Santa Barbara Green Mobile Home Complex, which is directly behind us, to owner occupancy. I will be providing, or I have already emailed you guys, the complete packets with both the, actually all the bylaws, the certificates from the state, and there's a lot more to this, but I'm just giving you guys the short version. Anyways, thank you for your time today, and I hope to be hearing from you guys about this.
Thank you. Stephen Mead.
Mr. Mayor, distinguished council, thank you for having me today. I like your agenda. Short, sweet, to the point. So I was having some beers the other day with a couple of friends, about 6 of us down there at the Night Lizard, and up came the subject of city council. Now, in past years, such a thing might be led by a story that wasn't so complimentary, followed by 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe another hour of people talking about, do you hear about what happened with that city council? I'm pleased to say that didn't happen. First, a lady I'd never met before, who happens to be a city employee, said, I kind of like what's going on with the city council. And I said, is that so? So do I. And we all said why, and we all started talking collaboratively, which was strange because I've never seen such a thing in 40 years. So that's a compliment to all of you and every one of you for being the people that you are and being the people that you are in public and in private and very consistent about your ways. So I do appreciate it. Don't always agree with everything you say, but I do like what you've been doing. And I want to thank you for also coming to the Santa Barbara Summer Solstice. I've never seen all 7 members want to participate in the float. And I've been doing this 30 years. So that too is another good sign of what you're doing, which is helping community, involving yourself in community, using words like collaborative, and I don't hear a lot of unnecessary chatter up here and personal agendas. So keep that up, and just if you think, I'm not going to come back in 6 months and ask you to see if you're still doing as good, I will. And I hope I have just as good a report then. Thank you, and see you on Saturday.
Thank you for the warning. Appreciate that, Mr. Mead. Brett Michelson.
Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Brett Michelson. I am the owner of State Street Axe Club. I'm trying to open up on 427 State Street. Not sure if me being here is even going to help, but I thought, what could it hurt? I know that the city is short-staffed. There has been a lot of delays. My inspections, building, construction permits, everything keep getting pushed back constantly. And I get nothing but excuses whenever someone does get back to me. I've spoken with Mark Aguilar and Jose Barajas, both very helpful, but then when they tell me they're going to get this going and light some fires and get things happening, I don't hear from them, nothing happens. All I'm trying to do is build a ADA required bathroom that you guys need me to have, and I can't open. I can't do anything, and while I'm waiting, I'm paying a ridiculous amount of rent every month just sitting on State Street, trying to bring an aspect that I feel is well needed to this neighborhood. There is no nighttime, real daytime entertainment besides drinking, eating, shopping. Tourists, locals, college kids, they need things to do past 8 p.m. I'm trying to provide that service. I keep getting held up because, we only have we lost 3 people. We're gonna get a third party to come inspect it. It's gonna happen then, and then I hear nothing. Nothing's happening. All I need to do is build a bathroom that you guys are requiring me to have a little bit bigger and build my safety cages. That is all. Thank you for your time. Hopefully this does help. If not, I'll keep trying some other ways. Come throw some axes with us when we're open.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone online ready to speak?
We do, Mr. Mayor. We have one, Aaron Ashland. And let me unmute you. Aaron Ashland, you can unmute yourself and speak.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse and City Council. I just want to speak about some things that I know are coming up. One is the portability of the patios. I was hoping that maybe we could find a hatch or something that would allow people to clean underneath their parklets instead of making them all like ground level. And then I was hoping that maybe there was a way to restrict pedestrians on the side to maybe just viewing parades from the sidewalks on the 500 block and possibly the 1200 block, instead of making these people pick up these beautiful platforms that they've all built. I also wanted to reframe some of the comments from Mr. Boss and Mr. Casey. I understand their points, and as a fellow business owners, I definitely understand where they're coming from. But the reality is that 85% of the city wants the promenade. And I think Mr. Boss said in one of his letters that when the promenade near him was shut down for the night, that it really increased his business. But the reality is the city wanted to sit on the promenade and couldn't. And so by taking away the promenade or making it smaller, you're just going to be limiting the possibilities for our residents. And ultimately, 85% of them want it. So I think we should all get behind that and try and make sure that we make it as good as we can. And I know, especially because I had to walk away from a location, some places we're favored in this and got bigger patios and no patios, and that's the reality. So one of my businesses is still open and the other one isn't. So that's kind of just the way it ends up when crazy things happen. And finally, I just want to say I truly appreciate the members of the ad hoc committee coming and attending the roundtable the other day. I was hoping that you guys could maybe, before you make final decisions, which we're hoping it will all be final until this is all realized, but I was hoping that maybe you could take a final look at the 500 block and especially the west side, where myself and 5 or 6 other businesses that our patios were cut back 5 or 6 feet, and whatever special consideration was given to the Santa Barbara Public Market to allow them to keep a 15-foot wide patio. I was hoping you might be able to have the fire marshal or someone come down and take a look and see if it was possible. Because as we look at inflation and a possible recession and post-COVID and other headwinds, like, it sure would be nice to have a little bit of extra room out there. And ultimately, the people across from us have 2 10-foot wide patios, and we have 1 10-foot patio. So it's, in the name of trying to be equal, it's not really equal, and it's not like they're far apart. They're directly across the street from us, and they have 2 patios so they have twice as much outdoor space as we do. I'd be happy to lease that 5 or 6 feet from the city the way they lease their 10 feet from the city, but we don't have that opportunity without someone coming down and realizing that for some odd reason, our patios are 10 feet closer to our buildings than they are across the street from us. So I appreciate your time and your service to our city. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there further speakers, Madam Clerk?
There are no further speakers.
Okay, we'll close public comment. We'll go to the consent calendar. Do you have some items to read?
We have 10 items to read today.
Dog.
Item 3, adoption of an ordinance delegating authority for the execution of Santa Barbara clean energy contracts. Recommendation that council adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara delegating authority for the execution of contracts for the purchase of energy necessary or convenient for the operation of Santa Barbara Clean Energy. Item 4, adoption of zoning ordinance amendments related to emergency service antennas. Recommendation that council adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending the municipal code by amending sections 30.185.410 and 30.300.010 relating to telecommunication facilities and antennas. Item 5, adoption of an ordinance amending Title 6 of the Municipal Code pertaining to animal control. Recommendation that council adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending the Municipal Code by amending Title 6 relating to animal control. Item 6, introduction of an ordinance moving the alcoholic beverage retail establishments ordinance from Chapter 28.80 to Chapter 28.77 to correct a non-substantive clerical error. Item 7, adoption of resolution of appropriation and award of contracts for construction of the Andre Clark Bird Refuge Coastal Restoration Project. Recommendation that council adopt a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending resolution number 21-045, adopting the budget for fiscal year 2022 to appropriate Creeks Capital Fund reserves for the Andre Clark Bird Refuge Coastal Restoration Project. Item 8, adoption of a resolution for the summary vacation of a public waterline easement at 1990 Las Canoas Ridge Way. Recommendation that council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara ordering the summary vacation of a public water line easement over portions of the real property known commonly as 1990 Las Canoas Ridge Way, APN 021-010-064. Item 9, adoption of resolution and purchase order to Western Audio for audio-visual upgrade project in city council chambers. Item 10, adoption of resolution to ratify the expenditures for the Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board's Lake Kachuma Secured Pipeline Project. Item 14, which is a consent public hearing on the adoption of resolution and public hearing regarding parking and business improvement area annual assessment report for fiscal year 2023. Recommendation that council A, consider any appropriate protest to the parking and business improvement area annual assessment report for fiscal year 2023 as required under the California Parking and Business Improvement Area Law of 1989. And B, adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara fixing and assessing the parking and business improvement area assessment rates for fiscal year 2023 and confirming approval of the parking and business improvement area annual assessment report for fiscal year 2023. And
Thank you
that-
very much. Does anyone need to pull an item? Are there public comments on any of the items? Madam Clerk, online or, oh, Ms. Gutierrez?
I have a quick question for Mr. Colon. If you could just explain to me for the consent calendar, item number 6, the change that's going to be made? There's a clerical error?
Mr. Colon?
Be happy to, Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez. We put it in the wrong place,
Okay,
basically, so this is just moving it over on the bookshelf.
okay, thank you.
Okay, no need to vote on that separately. No public comment online, Madam Clerk? All right, very good. May I have a motion for this consent calendar?
I'll move consent.
Okay, moved
I'll
by
second.
Sneddon, second by Gutierrez. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez.
Yes?
Councilmember Friedman.
Yes.
Councilmember Sneddon.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Harmon.
Yes.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez. Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
Mayor Rouse.
Yes. Very good. Move on to the regular administrative agenda. Would item read, please?
Excuse me. Item 15, adoption of the operating and capital budget for fiscal year 2023.
Very good. Mr. DiMartini.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Keith DiMartini. I'm the city's finance director. I'm here with my colleague, Ms. Natalia Glusik, the city's budget manager, and we are happy to present the final, hopefully the final presentation to the City Council and the public in regards to the fiscal year 2023 operating and capital budget. We're here before you this afternoon requesting your adoption of the budget. Next slide, please. The agenda for today's presentation is to provide just a summary of the calendar, all of the public hearings and public meetings that we've held over the past 2 months, a summary of the changes and the final adjustments that were approved by the City Council during the evening deliberation meeting just a few weeks ago, and then the final recommendation to City Council, which will include many resolutions that are required to be adopted by the council in order to formally adopt the budget for fiscal year 23, and then take any questions, public comment, and discussion that you might have. So before we jump into those final changes, just a reminder that we made a really important improvement to the city's budget process this year by going online. We have retired the previous 500-plus page PDF document or printed binder with an online budget transparency tool. It provides better transparency and information to the public. It has an intuitive navigation, It leverages the innate Google Translate functionality for language accessibility. It also has increased the efficiencies of our internal staff budget processes. And the city's budget can be found online at www.santabarbaraca.gov/budget. Just a summary here of all of the public meetings that we've had over the past 2 months. I won't go into detail on all of them, but we had a series of meetings with the Finance Committee where we delved in pretty deep into the revenue assumptions in the budget, all of the fee changes that are being proposed, and then final recommendations. Each department had a presentation at a public hearing in front of the full city council where each department presented revenues and expenses and projects and initiatives and operating challenges and capital projects and so on and so forth. And then moving into, on budget calendar 404 here, we had our final deliberation meeting with the full city council just about 2 weeks ago on June 8th, where you gave your final direction. Last Tuesday, city council approved of the rate changes for wastewater and solid waste as required by Proposition 218. And then here we are today, the final meeting with the city council requesting your adoption of the fiscal year 2023 budget. This slide here summarizes the changes that were approved by the city council at the deliberation meeting just about 2 weeks ago. First on the left, this summarizes what was presented at the full finance committee throughout the budget process in regards to revenue changes and fee changes. Staff also recommended a number of changes throughout the past 2 months to make sure that we had accurate assumptions, accurate calculations, and costing for positions and transfers between funds. The addition of 2 fire apparatus that were approved by council fairly recently and the budget appropriation that's required for those. And then finally, the city council gave their final direction to staff 2 weeks ago in regards to your recommended changes, which include the changes to the Visit Santa Barbara agreement, a change to the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act allocation for the library, the addition of additional funds for fire vegetation clearing and management in the fire department, the grant match for the commercial fishermen, as well as passing on the credit card processing fees for utility billings going forward. All of those changes have been incorporated and are now included in the budget that is before you this afternoon. This slide here summarizes the overview of the general fund. So this is a slide that we presented just about 2 weeks ago, where it showed 3 years of actual revenue and expenditure information, as well as what is being projected in the current fiscal year, in fiscal year 22. And then the most important column here, the fiscal year 23 budget that is before you this afternoon, has been updated based on the recommendations of what you have approved at the deliberation meeting. So it did adjust the city council request number from what it was previously. It's actually a favorable change of about $500,000. So the revised deficit that is before you this afternoon is approximately $1.1 million in the general fund, requiring the use of reserves. Next slide. So what happens next? So staff have already begun and will continue to focus on all of the major priorities and initiatives that were articulated in the recommended budget that has been before you and has been deliberated over the past 2 months. As far as the monitoring and compliance of the budget, we will produce monthly financial update reports that will be on the consent calendar with the city council every month so that you can monitor the revenues and expenditures for each of the major funds in the city. On a quarterly basis, we will provide a much more in-depth look at the trends of the city's budget and we'll present that to the Finance Committee. We will also be able to articulate a projection. Each quarter as we go through, staff will do our best to develop a projection of where we think we will end up at the end of the fiscal year to see if it might require any mid-cycle sort of adjustment or correction if necessary. We will also work to ensure that all of the expenditure reduction targets, which total approximately $1 million in the general fund, are met by the end of the fiscal year. Last Tuesday, we held a fairly long meeting at the Finance Committee where we initiated the Fiscal Sustainability Project. This will be a very in-depth look within the city operations, as well as exploring additional possibilities for revenue in the upcoming fiscal year and beyond. Also looking at ways that we can increase operational efficiencies or reduce any redundancies and do some prioritization work. And there will be a series of meetings directly with the Finance Committee over the next couple of months where recommendations will be developed and brought to the full City Council for your consideration as well. And then finally, we have already begun planning for the next 2-year cycle, the fiscal year 2024 and 2025 cycle. Initial work has already begun. We will be ramping up and getting ready for that over the coming months as well. Before you this afternoon are a series of resolutions that we respectfully request your approval on. The first one is the resolution that adopts the operating and capital budget for fiscal year 23. There's a detailed schedule of sources and uses in that accompany that resolution as well. There is a resolution basically confirming that we meet a state requirement for an appropriation limit called the GAN limit. We have been and will continue to be in compliance with this state law. Excuse me. There is also a resolution that approves of the amended schedule of penalties, fees, and service charges. This is the master fee schedule with all of the proposed changes that were reviewed in detail with the Finance Committee and that were also approved by the full City Council during the deliberation meeting just 2 weeks ago. We have included 2 separate resolutions for council members that have chosen to recuse themselves for very specific fees. So you can take those actions separately this afternoon. And then there's a resolution that authorizes the city administrator to approve of carryovers of expenditure appropriations in the current fiscal year 22, that will need to occur in next fiscal year 23, for commitments that the city has made in the current fiscal year. This is a standard process that we go through every year. It's a standard transition from one fiscal year to the other. This resolution authorizes the city administrator to work with staff to do this. And then finally, there's an annual resolution that authorizes the Public Works Director to make water purchases as necessary. The recommended action before you this afternoon from staff is to approve and adopt of the budget resolutions related to the operating and capital budget for fiscal year 2023. That concludes my presentation. Be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Director. Just let my colleagues know I plan to step aside on item D, so if there's any questions or discussion regarding that, please let me know before you do it. And other than that, I will entertain questions for Mr. DeMartini. Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. Thank you, Mr. DeMartini. And thank you also for taking time with me earlier this week, both of you, and explaining some of the shapes of those curves to me, which I really appreciated. I still, I think, have some lingering question, just tying together from the budget workshop comments and then through our discussion and then today, and just focusing on slide 9, which is also summarized in the staff report. Just some of the trends, I think I need to understand the assumptions going into them. And you did help me with that when we met individually, so I'm just hoping I still have some question here. So if you take the differences of the changes from year to year, the revenues, just the trend from 19 to 20, the revenue is down 0.7 million. From 20 to 21, it's up 14 million. From 21 to 22, it's up 9 million. But from 22 to 23, we're only projecting 4 million revenues. And then in our budget workshop, and I think I asked you about it a couple times, so I just want to be really clear. We said that all enterprise funds were trending up, all general fund revenues except for cannabis were trending up or stable. Everything was trending up. So why the projection so much lower than past years?
Councilmember Sneddon, thank you for that question. The main reason why the revenues in fiscal year 21 are showing sort of an increased trajectory and are leveling off sort of in the current year is because of an action that the City Council took about a year ago in regards to the first tranche of the American Rescue Plan Act rescue funds that came in. Council took an action to appropriate 100% of that, just approximately $11 million, I believe it was, into the general fund to partially offset the revenue that was lost since COVID began to continue to serve and provide services that are funded by the general fund. And so that's one-time revenue that came in to offset revenue loss. There was also increased transient occupancy tax and sales tax activity that has occurred above and beyond our initial budget projections that went from 21 into fiscal year 22. And then it kind of leveled off from there. So there's that one-time revenue that occurred in fiscal year 21 that wouldn't have normally been there.
So from 21 to 22, the revenues went up 9 million. So it would really have been minus 2 million, but we refilled it with the ARPA money. I'm just trying to establish sort of a trend from, 14 to 9 to 4. It seems like a big swing to me.
Yeah, Councilmember Sneddon, those are the major reasons. And the major reasons, again, are because of the one-time ARPA money. And then in fiscal year 22 specifically, the sales tax and the TOT revenue came in more substantially than originally budgeted and compared to prior year. So that caused the additional growth.
But only 4 million for 22, 23. Our total, we're projecting that our revenue is going to be less than any other previous year since 2019.
Councilmember Sneddon, that is correct if you compare year over year.
Okay, so I guess I'll just say I disagree. I think our TOT is going to stay strong. And then the expenditures, and this is, I think, just factual numbers, if you can help me again, from 19 to 20, the change is 4 million expenditures, then 20 to 21, 5 million, then 9 million, then 12 million. So that's exponential. And do we expect that to continue to go exponentially, and why?
Councilmember Sneddon, in fiscal year 20 and 21, and in fiscal year 22, actually, we started in fiscal year 20 implementing expenditure reduction strategies as it relates to impacts that our budget specifically encountered due to COVID. And that started in fiscal year 20, late in that fiscal year. And then in fiscal year 21 and 22, we implemented an approximately 5% reduction target for all the general fund operating departments, and that equated to just over $6 million annually. And so that brought our our base level of general fund expenditures down. In fiscal year 23, the city administrator's recommended budget only accounted for a 1% reduction target, which was only $1 million, which was one of the contributing factors for that growth in fiscal year 23 compared to prior years. Also, the other major driver for expenditure growth that's exponential in nature is our pension costs, both for what we pay for our normal costs every pay period, as well as our unfunded actuarial liability, which is an annual payment we make. That is continuing to grow at a very rapid rate. And then the other major factor is in regards to the allocation increases that we've made to fund our self-insurance fund. As I mentioned previously, our self-insurance fund is underfunded by approximately $10 million. We are in the first year of a 9-year plan to increase allocations gradually over that time, and that will be an additional $1 million every year on top of the allocation. So those are the major reasons for the increases in fiscal year 23.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'd just say that the projections of revenues going down at that rate, like halving each time versus our expenditures going up 4 million, 5 million, 9 million, 12 million. I still have a problem with that projection, but I'll leave it at that. And then I just have a question about how we're going to be voting on some of these items with how it's in this staff report versus the recommendation, because the recommendations are in A through H. And is that how, okay, A through H. So if we have to adopt this in its entirety, yes? So.
Councilmember Sneddon, that is staff's recommendation to adopt of the entire budget in its entirety, but the two separate resolutions in regards to the fees for the recusals could be done separately.
Okay, but so I don't know if this is a possible thing or not, but for other council-approved changes, we had talked about in the budget workshop, and this isn't something that I think would have a budget item, but under number 1, I believe I also requested, and I'm not sure if there was council support, so I'll ask, that we look at a residential vacancy fee. And we're looking at commercial vacancy fees. I didn't know if it could be added into item 1 or item 2 on page 2 of the staff agenda report. And I guess that's a question for council colleagues, if that's something that could be looked at as part of the fiscal sustainability initiative to identify affordable housing resources and permanent funding source for affordable housing. If I could just comment, or if I need to make a motion, or.
So you're speaking to the, excuse me, Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Sneddon, you're speaking to the items that are going to be discussed at the Finance Committee as part of their work.
Yes.
Yeah, and I want to be clear that we're happy to have full council refer things to the Finance Committee and expect that to continue to happen, but we also will be bringing forward staff-driven reports to the Finance Committee to address fiscal sustainability. So certainly, if you wanted to refer something, you could. I don't know whether we can do that as part of today's budget item, but certainly it will be one of the things we'll look at with regard to overall fees. We're really going to try and look at everything.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make sure, because it had come up in the budget workshop, and then it come up a couple different times, but then it didn't make it in the final changes. So if I just make a note of that I think that's still worth looking at. And then on the other approved changes, number 5, if I don't agree with that one, is my choice to either vote for the whole budget altogether or for the reduction of the ARPA funding from 650 to 250 for East
Honorable
Side
Mayor,
Ranch Library.
that's a parliamentary question. The issue is whether the action is severable, and absent a second resolution, I don't know that it would be severable. So I think your appropriate action, Councilmember Sneddon, would be to oppose the entire matter.
So my choice is either to approve the entire budget, or even though I voted no on that portion previously.
Yes, were this not a resolution, it would be severable, but we have no means of creating a second resolution to address that separately today.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Friedman.
It's just a clarifying for the last point that Councilmember Sneddon made, rather than a yes or a no on the whole budget, is we as a council actually all supported that back earlier because of the issue that when that item had come forward, we thought that the ARPA funds would in fact cover the library being open 7 days a week at the time, reopening them. Turns out that once we allocated it, but then there was more additional information that the library director, and Ms. Bjork, feel free to step in if I have this, is that it was much more complex and we weren't able to do that. So we were able to open the library another day, but then that was at the cost of the 250. And so then the remainder of the council during the workshop decided to put that back into the general fund for that. So it was actually, we all supported it at the time. And then last week it was a little different, but that was the reasoning behind it. Was originally was supposed to open the library 7 days a week, but even with that, we weren't able to do that. That's why we took that specific action.
All right, thank you. Are there further questions of staff? All right, very good. Are there public comments online for this item, Madam Clerk?
There are no hands raised.
All right, very good. I would like to step aside, and then if we're going to go ahead and make a motion, I'd like to take item D first, so I can step aside, if I may. And Ms. Harmon, would you ask for the motions, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Do we have a motion for item D?
Yes.
A motion made by Councilwoman Sneddon, I think. Can't quite hear.
Correct.
Is there a second?
It was made by Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez, and I'll second it.
Excuse me. Thank you. So motion by Councilwoman Alejandra Gutierrez, seconded by Councilmember Friedman. May we have a vote, please, on item D, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Councilmember Friedman.
Yes.
Councilmember Sneddon.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Harmon.
Yes.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez. Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez.
Yes.
And Mayor Rouse has abstained.
And then,
Thank you. The motion carries. We can get Mayor Rouse back in, please.
And then, Mr. Mayor, I need to recuse myself from item E, and the reason for the recusal is it affects my employer, and it may affect my employer and source of income, so I'll be removing myself from chambers.
All right, very good. We're moving to item E, and may we have a motion, please, for item E only? Ms.
I'll make a
Gutierrez, item E, moved.
Second.
Second by Jordan. May we have the vote, please, Madam Clerk?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat the maker of the motion?
Is for item E.
And the maker of the motion?
Oh, I'm sorry, the maker of motion was Alejandro Gutierrez, and the seconder was Mr. Jordan.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Harmon?
Yes.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez? Councilmember Jordan?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Gutierrez says aye. Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez?
Yes?
Councilmember Friedman? He's abstained. And Councilmember Sneddon?
Yes.
Mayor Rouse?
Aye. All right, very good. We'll get Mr. Friedman back in. And we'll go for the balance of the staff recommended resolutions.
So moved.
Moved
Second.
by Jordan, second by Friedman. Once again, may we have the vote?
Oscar Gutierrez? Sorry, Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez. Councilmember Jordan?
Aye.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez?
Yes?
Councilmember Friedman?
Yes.
Councilmember Sneddon?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Harmon?
Yes.
And Mayor Rouse?
Aye. Okay. Thank you very much. And we're all set, Mr. DiMartini. We will move to the next item, which is the Library Department. Madam Clerk, would you read that item, please?
Item 16, Community Arts Workshop Update from Santa Barbara Arts Collaborative.
Very good. And do we have a staff presentation? We do.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and members of City Council. I'm Casey Caldwell, the Managing Director of the Santa Barbara Arts Collaborative and Community Arts Workshop. And it is my pleasure today to give our annual report in person for the first time since the beginning of the pandemic. I believe it was 2019 the last time I was here, so great to be back. 2021 was a good year at the Community Arts Workshop. We had a dramatic increase in the level and diversity of programming. It sort of felt like the CAW and maybe the community to extent started to emerge in April, and at the CAW anyway, that just kind of never stopped. So we just had more and more use over time throughout the year, and the community found the CAW to be an ideal location for COVID safety and flexible use. The CAW's abundant airflow allowed programming to come back when artists may have been too intimidated to do otherwise. So it served a key part in helping our community heal last year. The combination of,
Are you going to put the slides up on the screen?
oh, I'm not. I don't have control over that.
You're plugged into laptop one?
Yeah, I'm in. There
There we go, thank you.
That was slide 1. That was slide 2. Now we're here. The combination of some of the renovations that we completed and the easing of COVID made it that in 2021, it seemed that the CAW really came into its own. The number and diversity of the uses was really unparalleled for us last year, and the space began to demonstrate that it can be self-sustaining at operational scale. Phase 4 of renovations of the space began last year. The majority of the summer solstice gate was put in place and completed at the beginning of this year. Underground work for the sprinkler system began, and we renovated the community room into a much-needed small gallery space for individual artists and local artist groups to organize shows. The Community Arts Workshop really fulfills a vital need. So these are statistics from users of the space last year. When asked how important the existence of the Community Arts Workshop was to their ability to conduct their project, 70% of users said it was either vital or highly important. That is, they wouldn't have been able to do the project without a space like the CAW, and 10% said it was important, using the space was significant to their success. Studies over many years have consistently shown that there is vanishing little affordable space for artists in Santa Barbara to make and show their work, so the CAW really meets an important need. One of the things that makes the CAW special is it's used for almost everything related in the arts. The space is really uniquely flexible. So this is a reflection of all of the various projects and genres of projects that took place in the CAW last year. Last year, we had more than 845 artists, organizers, and nonprofit leaders conduct their work at the CAW, and this is a reflection of the various projects that took place there. So we had a number of long-term, ongoing projects that were finally able to return after a hiatus for COVID, like Summer Solstice and VADA at Santa Barbara High. The photos up there are from the Solstice Workshop at the CAW last year, and Pianos on State, which took place as well. Nearly 4,000 members of the public attended public events at the CAW, including theater, all kinds of pop-up art shows, and arts and crafts markets. Most of those photos are from the Youth Makers Market, which is just a wonderful new project that had their first few projects at the CAW last year, led by a couple of local youth who received the Independent Local Heroes Award last year, so we wanted to make sure to reflect that in our photos. And a wide variety of workshops and film projects, rehearsals, artists finding pop-up workshops for larger projects, a wide variety of ongoing art classes, and the maintaining of ongoing programs and traditions, like the Company in Residence Santa Barbara Center for Aerial Dance, Pianos on State, Ready to Hang, and many others. The CAW really is able to do what we do because of what the city it has agreed to do in partnership with us. So we have a 25-year lease from the city at $1 a year, which means the space is efficient and affordable to a wide variety of users. City funding through the Office of Arts and Culture Organizational Development Grant for the last 5 years has allowed us to hire staff, develop committees to serve as a community resource, and sustain the development of programming and adapt to COVID for the last couple of years. And of course, we are always incredibly grateful for the invaluable assistance, advice, and encouragement of many city staff and elected officials in ways large and small over many years. Kind of a general overview of how the Community Arts Workshop works. So the lower overhead, which I just spoke to, leads to affordable use fees. The low overhead comes from our $1 a year lease from the city, our very lean staffing model. Currently, it's just me on staff. And that on principle, we keep equipment and resources as lean and versatile as we possibly can to make the space affordable and accessible for the entire community. The space itself is accessible. It is a raw workshop building in the heart of Santa Barbara you can walk right into from the street. There are no carpets, there are no barriers to entry. It's a space where you can both make a mess and do an experiment and do something very refined and polished. So that flexibility and accessibility is really vital. We have a lot of beautiful art spaces in Santa Barbara, but we don't have a lot of spaces like this. And then generally, missionally and practically, we just work really hard to try to make the space as accessible to people as possible. It's one of my major roles in running the space. And we do everything we can to collaborate with users. We provide a wide variety of tools, including co-promotion on our mailing list, software and systems we refine for gallery shows and events, connections and advice whenever we possibly can to volunteers, to grants, to donors, to advisors. And finally, just the way the space functions in general. We have 4 spaces. They get used simultaneously. So you'll often on a day have an art class in one room and a rehearsal in another room and a board meeting for a nonprofit in another room. It's a space people can meet, share ideas. New things come from the way the space functions. We wanted to give a report on construction progress. I already mentioned the progress we made on renovations to the space in 2021. The photo on the right reflects that new small gallery space, which I mentioned earlier, which we're already seeing a lot of use for individual artists and small artist groups. What we still have to go is one of the main buildings needs a new roof. It leaks. It needs to be insulated. We are putting in a heating and ventilation system, a solar power system. The exterior needs to be repaved. We're doing some landscaping, some more lighting, and donor recognition. We've made an incredible amount of progress. So we've completed $1,600,000 of work. There's $400,000 left to go. A major part of that I want to make sure to thank the city for was $300,000 that the city allocated from RDA funds in 2014, which really kicked the project off. The majority of the funds since then have come from private donations and local foundations, which we're incredibly grateful for. So we're hard at work on fundraising for that last $400,000. And should there ever be any opportunities at the city for us to apply for funding, we would very gratefully pursue them. We've come a very long way. This was one of the first projects at the CAW, Whitmoon Theater Company's production Hard Rain, which was in December of 2016. If you walked into that space today, you would really see how much it's transformed since then. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present and for everything the city does to support the Community Arts Workshop.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Okay, do we have any public comment on this item?
We have nobody with raised hands, Mr. Mayor.
Very good, thank you. Back to council for comments. Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse, and thank you so much for giving us that update. And I just recently went to your fundraising event, and you had all of those photographs up inside of all the different uses of the space, and I had no idea how much it was used. And for those of us who remember, it was a recycling center. I used to spend my Saturdays there, and then the transformation of it to what it is now. And I just want to take the opportunity to really acknowledge former Mayor Helene Schneider for her part in this, and I'm now Mayor Randy Rouse, I'm sure, was on the council at the time and supporting, and the way it's been used. Even the city used it for our redistricting space, and during COVID, there were not places where we could meet in groups like that, but still at the CAW, and the Youth Makers Market is fabulous. I know a lot of youth who've really come into their own in that space, and Pacific Pride and Lights Up and the Folk Orchestra and Pianos on State and classes. I had no idea all the range of classes offered there. And Solstice, so the triumphant return this year of Solstice, and just really thank you and appreciate the space.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell, for the presentation. Good to see you again in person. And I just want to recognize Sarah York-Rubin, our commissioner, so Carnegie Arts Commissioner, as well as in the crowd here. So Sarah Rubin. And just the ability to have this, as you mentioned, it's affordable for our artists, and that goes a long way in terms of them being able to make a living here in town and continue to be here and provide the diversity of economies that we have. And I know that the arts contribute, there was a study, it's outdated, but we're updating it, but it was a few $100 million in terms of, about 300 million if I recall, in terms of the economic impact, whether it's the artists themselves or their support of other businesses. So to have this available for that and for the community to come and take classes and participate in events and festivals such as this coming weekend is great. So just want to thank you for the presentation today and updating us on the work that you're doing there.
Thank you, and thanks, Ms. Sen, for mentioning Ms. Helene Schneider. I had evening with her last evening. We talked about the CAW quite a bit. She's very proud. She was quite a driver in that whole thing, and held the Mayor's Arts Forum for the mayoral candidates, and it was actually, as usual, the only fun forum in the entire quiver of forum. So anyway, thank you. Well done, and I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, we will move to the next item, which we hope is just as much fun, which is about our water shortage alert. Would you read the item, please, Madam Clerk?
Yes, item 17, adoption of resolutions of appropriation and other actions relating to implementing a Stage 2 water shortage alert. I will read B aloud. To adopt by reading of title only, a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara declaring a Stage 2 water shortage alert pursuant to State Water Resources Control Board Resolution Number 2022-0018, adopting drought-related emergency regulation for water conservation in response to Executive Order N-7-22, and repealing Resolution Number 19-021. Oh, and item C is to adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending Resolution Number 21-045, adopting the budget for fiscal year 2022 to appropriate water operating fund reserves for the city's water conservation rebate program.
All right, and I'd like to invite our talented water staff to report.
Thank you. Mayor Rouse, as you can see, our presentation is not showing, so I've asked someone to bring Sarah Gorman up unless, Madam Clerk, oh, there we go. We got it back. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and council members. Thank you for having us here today. I am Kathy Taylor, the Water Services and Supply Manager, and I'm here today with staff members Dakota Corey, she's our Water Supply Analyst, and Madeline Wood, who is our Water Conservation Analyst. And at this time, I will turn it over to Ms. Corey for the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Sorry, we're just pulling up the presentation.
It's our first.
Good afternoon, Mayor Rouse and council members. As Ms. Taylor said, my name is Dakota Corey, and I'm the city's water supply analyst. And we're here to talk to you today about our proposed Stage 2 water shortage alert. Just a quick overview of our presentation today. I'm going to be giving a water supply update that looks at the state as a whole and then Santa Barbara specifically. Then we'll go through a brief history of the governor's executive order and water board final regulations. Finally, we'll talk about our Stage 2 water shortage alert and some of the details that it contains, and then I will hand over the presentation to Ms. Wood, who will talk about additional actions the staff is taking to secure our water supplies. And for our water supply update. So this graph here is a graphic that's produced by the federal government, and it is the U.S. Drought Monitor for the state of California. You'll see by the color coding there that the state as a whole is in severe drought conditions. Over 95% of the state can be classified as either severe, extreme, or exceptional drought. Now, this drought monitor is based on physical characteristics in the environment, and so that means rainfall, stream flow, snowpack, and soil moisture content. It doesn't account for water supplies in any individual area, but you can see that the situation in California is quite dire in terms of these drought metrics. Next slide. Getting a little bit more local, I have here a graph of rainfall at Gibraltar Reservoir back to 2011. You may recall that 2011 is the last year that Lake Cachuma spilled. So since then, you can see the red line that goes across the slide is our average 50-year rainfall. And then we have the average from 2012 to 2022. So basically, the last 10 years is significantly lower at 18 inches versus 27 inches. And you can see these last 10 or 11 years have been normally very dry, even below that 10-year average. We did get a couple of above average or normal rain years in 2017, 2019, and 2020. And that's really helped us stretch our supplies since 2011 when Cachuma spilled last. But as a whole, we're experiencing a very dry period. So this recent dry year is sort of on the back of this extended dry period. Next slide, please. Now let's flip to the demand side of our water supply situation. In this graphic here, you'll see the black line that's the highest up, which represents our 2013 actual water production. We produce water to meet demand, so it's a good way to think about water demand in the city. There's a gray line. It's a little bit hard to differentiate, but in comparison to the other two blue lines, which is our 2020 actual production, and then you see two blue lines. The royal blue line is 2021, and the kind of turquoise is 2022 to date. So the overall message here is that since 2013, which the state described as our pre-drought baseline in the past, our customers have continued to conserve 25% compared to 2013. So we really want to commend the residents of Santa Barbara for really embracing water conservation as a way of life. And one thing that's interesting to note here is that gray line, you can see kind of a bucket or a dip in the months of February through April. So 2020 is the new baseline that the state is proposing for our reporting. But you can see March and April 2020 were actually quite wet. We received over 16 inches of rainfall in that year. And so when we're comparing water use in 2021 and 2022, we're obviously going to be higher than those because those were dry months these other years. So what does that mean when you put it all together? We've got these environmental conditions that show that things are very dry. We've seen very little rainfall, but we have this community that's really conserving and stretching our supplies. And what that means when you put it together is that we have enough water supply to meet demands through the end of water year 2024, which ends in September 2024. And that's a mix, that is a result of a mix of two things. One is that continued conservation, which I already discussed from our community, and also is prudent planning on the community's part in terms of implementing desalination, which has allowed us to store more water in Kachuma, and just managing our very diverse water supply portfolio. Essentially, when one supply isn't available, we have a lot of others to call upon. Currently, we have about 2 years' worth of supply stored in Lake Kachuma. So this is a graphical representation of that statement that I just made. This has our water production back to 2012, and then it projects out to water year 2024. And what's interesting about this graphic are two things to pay attention to. There's different colors in each bar, which represent each of our different water supplies. And then the height of the bar was the total demand for that year. So this really tells a story, because on the left-hand side of the graph, you can tell that we still had a lot of surface water supplies available. You see the dark blue and the medium color blue, that's Gibraltar and Kachuma. And we relied on those. And then as the drought continued, our demands dropped significantly. Our community really heeded the call for conservation. And we also started using different supplies. So you see the orange and the yellow, which represent State Water Project water and groundwater. Desal came online in 2017. There's a little tiny bit of green there, but then was fully operational in 2018. And we were able to get through the last drought, which may be continuing, by a combination of supplies. Now, as we're projecting out to water year 2024, you can see that, as I mentioned earlier, we still have a lot of water stored in Kachuma, and that's how we plan to meet our demands for the next couple of years, with continued use of desalination and some pumping of our groundwater basins. Next slide, please. Now, one thing I think is really important to think about when we look at these projections out into the future is the conservative strategy I use when I'm putting these projections together. We essentially need to be able to answer the question, if the next 3 years are really dry, do we have enough water to meet demands? So what I assume is that there'll be essentially no useful rainflow, and we won't have rainfall, and we won't have any inflow into Gibraltar or Kachuma. In reality, even this last year, where we saw only 67% of average rainfall, we still got 2,500 acre-feet of storage in Gibraltar, which was about a quarter of our supply for the year. So we're planning for the worst-case scenario when we're projecting out. In reality, hopefully it won't be that bad, but we have to be prudent. Go to the next slide. This is a graphical representation of what I just said. This was kind of trying to answer the question, okay, if it really is that bad, what are we looking at in water year 2025, which is 1 year further out in my projections. Now, what I did do here is, assuming that this next winter is also dry, we would likely start implementing some more conservation. So I applied 8% conservation to water year 2023, and then 15% to water years 24 and 25. And that's the purple on the top of the bars. What that leaves us with is a shortage in water year 2025. That's the red and white hashed lines. But again, thinking about those conservative planning assumptions, each blank space between the 3 bars is a rainy season. So we're really looking at 3 rainy seasons before we get to water year 2025, which again, even if it's dry, means we could get 25% of our supply in Gibraltar, et cetera. So the city really feels confident that our water supplies are secure for the next several years. But we also recognize that the statewide drought conditions are severe, and we want to support the rest of our state in moving forward with some of the regulations that the governor's asked for. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to describe some of the actions the governor's taken in the last year or so. Next slide. So the governor started to become alert to the dry conditions last summer, and it started to affect Santa Barbara in July 2021. That's when the drought state of emergency was expanded to include Santa Barbara County, among others. And then also in July 2021, the governor enacted Executive Order N-10-21, which ordered all Californians to voluntarily reduce their water use by 15%. Now, with that voluntary reduction requirement, there were no specific water reduction targets for water agencies. In October 2021, the drought state of emergency was extended to include the entire state. Next slide. Then it was time to wait and cross our fingers for a rainy season. And it turned out to be pretty dry, unfortunately. So now, more recently, in March 2022, the governor enacted Executive Order N-7-22, which directed the State Water Resources Control Board, or the Water Board, to adopt emergency regulations. And he had 3 requirements to be included in those regulations. First, all urban water suppliers needed to submit their annual water supply and demand assessment 1 month early. So they were originally due on July 1st, and that was moved up to June 1st. The annual water supply and demand assessment is a new statewide requirement for water suppliers where we show 1 year out. It's a 1-year projection versus the 3 years, which we normally do here at the city, to show that we have enough supplies to meet demands. The governor also asked for all urban water suppliers to implement at a minimum their stage 2 water shortage response actions from their water shortage contingency plan. That sounds like a bunch of water jargon. I'll describe it further in a few minutes. Third, that he asked for a prohibition of irrigation of all non-functional CII, which is commercial, industrial, and institutional turf grass. Next slide. So in response, the Water Board adopted their final regulations on May 24th, 2022. And really what the governor asked for is what was adopted, but there was a minor change that kind of made a big difference for the city. So you'll see here on my slide that in the middle of the slide, the word all is bolded. And so the new regulations ask that all urban water suppliers implement all of the shortage actions in their level 2 for water shortage contingency plan, which again, I'm going to describe more in just a minute. They also included the ban on irrigation of non-functional turf grass, and it is specific to potable water only, so recycled water irrigation for those purposes is allowed. So next I'm going to describe our proposed stage 2 water shortage alert. So the city's water shortage contingency plan was adopted by council in June 2021. It's part of our enhanced urban water management plan, which is our long-term water supply planning document for the city. You can see in the left-hand column of this table that we have 4 water shortage stages, and in the right-hand column, they're all associated with a certain level of shortage. So the idea is if we project that our supplies are going to be short by a certain percentage, we would enact one of these stages, and then we would enact actions to help us reduce demand to get within that shortage reduction. Now, when we developed this plan, we know from experience, because we've gone through a drought or 2 by now, that each drought is different, and the actions needed to reduce water use varies from drought to drought. And so we designed our water shortage contingency plan to have a menu of potential actions. And the idea was that Water Commission and Council would choose from that menu which actions made the most sense for the current situation. But because the Water Board regulations require us to implement all stage 2 actions, it looks a little bit different this time around. Next slide, please. So what you're going to see next is a series of 3 tables. They should be in your staff report, so I apologize for the small text on the screen. What this is this is the table from our water shortage contingency plan, which lists all those actions. This is the menu that we had designed and council adopted in 2021. And I've color-coded it to help explain where we're going and where we've been. So the blue rows are actions that we already implement. They might be part of our municipal code, or they're part of our regular water conservation program. And you can see on the left-hand column of this table that these actions on this slide apply to all shortage levels, so not specific to 1, 2, 3, or 4. The orange-colored items are items that we're recommending for priority education and enforcement under this new stage 2 water shortage alert. So you'll see that there's one here for rebates for turf grass replacement. We would like to reenact our turf grass replacement rebate program, which has been new and improved. Next slide. This is a continuation of that same table. You'll see again on the left the stages associated with each of these items. So this table contains most of those stage 2 actions that the state is asking us to implement. You'll see that there's two orange colors. There's kind of the bright orange, which are the actions that we're recommending for priority enforcement and education. And what I mean by that is that's where staff is really going to direct their staff time and resources to educate the public and enforce on the actions. In lighter yellow, there are our other stage 2 items, which we'll be implementing with this alert. But we won't be spending as much staff time on education and enforcement. And the idea here is that we've found through the past implementation that a lot of these ones take a lot of administrative time and cost, but actually don't get you that much water savings. So we've really tried to choose the ones that are gonna help with water savings and are really just common sense measures for using water efficiently here in our community. Next slide. This is the last of those 3 tables. Again, on the left-hand side, you can see the shortage levels. So now we're looking at shortage levels 3 and 4, which aren't part of the governor's executive order, except for you can see highlighted in purple towards the bottom, there's the landscape, other landscape restriction or prohibition. And so I highlighted this one in purple because that really refers to that ban on commercial, industrial, and institutional irrigation of non-functional turf grass. So that's also going, well, it's actually already in place because it was enacted by the state. But we will educate our customers on that. So in summary, our proposed stage 2 water shortage alert has messaging that aligns with the statewide drought conditions. So even though the city's water supply is secure, we recognize that the state is in a dire situation with drought conditions, and we want to make sure that we are doing our part to contribute to saving as much water as we can. It doesn't include a specific water reduction target since we don't have a shortage currently in the city. We do address all of the water board's requirements, or the water board's requirements to implement all stage 2 actions. And again, those ones that we're prioritizing for education and enforcement are common sense measures that really just encourage efficient use of water in our community. Next slide. And this is just a slide to summarize those actions that were bright orange, which we're recommending for priority education and enforcement. So they include using a shutoff nozzle if you're using water through a hose or an outdoor faucet, including washing vehicles or boats. Not hosing down hard surfaces such as patios, sidewalks, except for when needed for preventative maintenance or health and safety. And also not irrigating between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 a.m., which is when you see more evaporation and wind, so a lot of the water that you're trying to apply to your landscape doesn't get there anyways. Next slide. So the way I've structured this presentation, we have several recommendations in our council agenda report. This is the recommendation that pertains to the section of the presentation that I just gave. So this is recommendation B in your council agenda report. And that's that council should adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of City of Santa Barbara declaring a stage 2 water shortage alert pursuant to State Water Resources Control Board Resolution number 2022-0018, adopting drought-related emergency regulation for water conservation in response to Executive Order N-7-22 and repealing Resolution 19-021. And with that, I'm going to hand over the presentation to Ms. Wood, who's going to talk more about what our staff is doing currently to continue to secure our water supplies moving forward.
Thank you, Ms. Corey. My name is Madeline Wood. I'm the Water Conservation Analyst for the city. So we're going to continue to implement our robust water conservation program that we've had since the late 70s. And one of the things that we're here today to request is appropriations to increase funding for our water conservation rebate program, specifically bringing back our landscape rebate that's geared towards replacing high water use turf grass with low water use plants, native pollinators for Pollinator Week, and drip irrigation to reduce the amount of water that's applied to landscapes. This was a program that we had from 2009 to 2020, and over the course of that program, we rebated over 1,500 projects within savings of 2,000 acre feet per year for all of those projects combined. So it's been a a successful program. We sunsetted it in 2020 due to shifting COVID regulations and sort of prioritizing help with high water bills, but it's something that we're excited to bring back. Next slide, please. So in terms of our current conservation program, here's just a highlight of some of our key programs. We have waterways prevention through our municipal code and enforcement. We have landscape design standards for development projects. We have a really wonderful website that's due to be replaced next week, as well as a lot of DIY videos in our conservation hotline. We also offer water checkup appointments. We're often the first folks that people call when they get a high water bill or a door hanger that says, you may be getting a high water bill because we're seeing a higher meter read on your property. We've got some great school programs that include musical assemblies and video contests. We currently have rebates for mulch, high-efficiency clothes washers, and the Flume Smart Home Leak Detection Program. We've got a Green Gardener program that we've been running for over 20 years for water-wise efficient and resource-efficient practices for landscapers. And we've got our classes for homeowners as well. And then we have irrigation budgets for our dedicated irrigation meters. We have plenty of sites throughout the city that have a separate irrigation meter, and we help them water to a budget. Next slide, please. So as Ms. Corey said, we have these recommendations sprinkled throughout the presentation today where they are associated with what we're talking about. So this is the specific recommendation C about the landscape rebate appropriation. And we will have a summary slide at the end. Next slide, please. We also are asking to create a 5-year as-needed contract with Katz & Associates, who is one of our contractors for outreach that the city's been working with for many years now for water resources projects. So one of these contracts doesn't actually appropriate funds, encumber funds, sorry. It's something that's as needed as projects develop. So we've worked with Katz & Associates on several water resources projects, and what we anticipate would be water rate messaging, wastewater rate messaging, infrastructure projects that are coming up in the next 5 years, drought outreach. And what you can see on the slide here is an example of this year, a wastewater rate outreach that we did with them, explaining what your bill pays for wastewater. Next slide, please. So that is recommendation D, is specific to that as-needed contract with Katz & Associates. Next slide, please. In terms of additional water supply actions, we're planning to start our groundwater pumping in a couple months here, and that's from Storage Unit 1. We're constructing a pipeline that will convey groundwater from the Alameda well that's in Storage Unit 1 to our Ortega groundwater treatment plant, which is located right next to the Community Arts Workshop. You can see it in the background of some of those beautiful pictures. We've worked with the Central Coast Water Authority to purchase 863 acre-feet of supplemental water. And as Ms. Corey stated, we did draft and submit that water supply and demand assessment and submitted it by the June 1st deadline, and we'll do the same with the final that's due by the July 1st deadline. And both of those show that we have surplus supply to meet demands in the forecasted year. Next slide, please. So we want to recognize that this direction from the state isn't aligned with our water shortage contingency plan in terms of how we as the city respond to and plan for droughts. So we've been working at a state level and at a local level with other water suppliers to talk about the one-size-fits-all approach and how that can be troublesome for our service area. So we've met with representatives from State Senator Limon's office and Assemblymember Bennett's office in May. We've submitted a comment letter to the Water Board regarding the draft regulations. We were a co-signer of what was called the Stress Test Coalition, which is a group of about 30 water suppliers throughout the state who have sufficient supplies to talk about the draft regulations with the Water Board. And we've had continued dialogue with DWR and State Water Board staff. And as promised, here is the summarized version of our recommendations for today, and we're available for any questions or comments.
All right, questions of staff and council. Start with Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have several. Welcome back. So good to see you guys. I have some problems reconciling a couple of the slides, so you're going to have, I think you're just going to have to educate me. Safe assumption to say our city water demand right now is at or under 10,000 acre feet a year?
It's
Give or
right
take?
around 10,000 acre feet,
Okay.
including recycled water.
Then on that bar graph that you showed all the different sources that you did call the water demand bar graph, you're actually showing our demand is up like 13,000 acre feet. Is that because you snuck the word Montecito in that graph?
That's correct.
Okay, I figured as much. So when are we projecting we buy a new train at D-Cell? Is that after the next 2 years when, if nothing happens positively, and that's when we start to see the problem arise?
So that's a very good question. In our enhanced urban water management plan, we have an adaptive management plan, which basically has trigger points based on both supply available and projected demand. And based on that expansion of desal, we would want to start thinking about probably in a year or so, should dry conditions persist. It would take about 2 years once we decided that we wanted to move forward with that to actually actively be producing additional water.
So if nothing good happened, we'd be looking at putting that in place in water year 25, probably, right? Is that right? Give or-
Potentially, yes.
Okay. And that gives us 3,500 acre feet?
Currently, it gives us 3,125 acre feet. We'd probably be looking at expanding to 5,000.
Okay, then a slide or two later, you had another one with just 3 supply outlook bars. And so you're saying that we're good through fiscal year 23 and 24, right?
Water year, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, water year. But the assumption you're making between 23 and 24 is that we will double our conservation to be good from 8 to 15%, right?
That's correct, yes.
So how do you feel about that?
So at that.
I guess I mean, so is that a pretty good assumption, since at the same time we're saying, hey, we're really doing well and we don't need to meet the state's additional conservation costs, because I assume once we conserve down to a certain level, it's just harder to keep conserving without really getting painful. So we're actually saying we're good while we double, on that second year of being good, we have to double our conservation. So it's concerning to me, and I guess I want to phrase that as a question so you can tell me why it shouldn't be.
So you're correct that from water year 23 to water year 24, I proposed that we would double up our conservation from 8% to 15%. That's with the idea that we're really looking out in that graph to water year 25. And so we have adequate supplies to more than meet the needs of water year 23 and 24 without conservation currently. And again, that's why I really wanted to explain that the tricky part of doing these projections and the conservative planning approach is that between each of those 3 bars is a rainy season. And so, currently we know that the last winter was dry, and we're not proposing to enact any specific water use reduction or conservation percentage for this current water year. We'll wait and see what happens next winter, and if it's dry again, then it is time to start enacting conservation, and that's kind of how the story goes in California.
So I think what I heard you say is if you just don't look at the year 3, just look at the 2, you could get to where you're still good with 8%, but you're sort of preloading for that 3rd year.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. Mike Jordan talk. Right.
You got it.
And then on skipping way back on priorities for education enforcement, you say irrigating using an automatically or manual controlled in-ground irrigation system only between the hours of such and such and such and such. Why are we not restricting hand watering to night times or before daybreak kind of thing?
Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Jordan, that's a good question. We did in the last drought, and we did have some people where that was hard for them, especially gardeners who were there a certain time of day to just hand water a few pots. So the hand watering is quite efficient. We love hose draggers. You're not out there in the rain hand watering, and typically you're paying attention to what you're watering, and a sprinkler does not do that. So hand watering we do want to encourage. And since it's not as much evaporation, it's not misting sprinklers, we're not as concerned about the time of the day hand watering.
I need to get a badge and bring it over and stick it on my house because I feel bad dragging the hose out to the blueberries and feeling like I'm standing there naked with a hose, you know? So, and then I think, non-functional turf grass, can you talk about what the definition of non-functional is? I'm assuming it's like not ours, not a park, not a school, but tell me how you're really going to define that.
So Councilmember Jordan, we were really hoping the state would better define that, and they have not. So it's really what's written into the state regulation, which is ornamental and non-recreated. So that does not apply to a park. Anything where, people are kicking a ball around, throwing a Frisbee on, parks and schools are typical examples of that. However, since it's commercial, institutional, and industrial, there are some city sites, and we've been meeting with parks to talk about some areas that aren't recreated. And there are opportunities throughout our city for an area that you can't kick a ball on. It's not held for events. Typically, the way we think of it is if the only person walking across it is the one mowing it, it's probably not used as a recreated surface in that condition.
Okay. Then I saw another question going backwards. So the way I understand the state's on the water board's implementation, and you can correct me. So the governor said 15%. The water board said their stage 2 is 25%. But we're saying our local stage 2 is what we want to do because of our unique situation. Is that right? Did I get that kind of progression right?
Sort of.
Okay.
So another good question. I think the piece that's missing in that answer is that we don't actually have a targeted water use reduction here in the city. So the governor's recommendation for 15% reduction is voluntary and it's statewide. It doesn't apply to any specific water agency. Then the state board came out and asked for implementation of all stage 2 demand reduction actions. Typically, in a water shortage contingency plan, stage 2 is associated with 20%. But again, there's no targeted number associated with that. We're following the requirements of the water board regulations, which just says that we're going to enact all of our actions associated with stage 2, but there's no water savings target associated with that.
Okay. And because there's not, or if there was, would we, if somehow we get backed into that and we have to pick a number and it's 20 or 25% just because it's easy for somebody to paint a big picture, does that begin to threaten our obligation or our revenue from the Montecito contract? If we have to restrict, can we still send the obligated amount of water and maintain our projected I just knew I'd wait till my last question and I'd get an attorney standing up. But does that potentially then begin to lead to a problem with that agreement?
Mr. Henschke, do you want to? I think I can answer it, but I'm going to let the expert take it.
I'm just going to go for the podium.
Oh, that works.
Honorable Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Jordan, under the agreement, the city remains obligated to deliver the full contract amount to Montecito every year, regardless of the water shortage condition, until we expand the plant to 7,500. So during a drought condition, we will continue to be obligated. Once we reach the 7,500 acre foot expansion, if there is a shortage condition that affects our water supplies and Montecito's, then there's a shortage sharing provision in there. So that's a long answer to your question. The revenues continue, the water deliveries also continue.
So there's a
We don't
pinch
get to
point.
cut it
There's a
back.
pinch point potentially in there,
Yes.
right? If the state regulates us down to a point where we actually can't produce the demand that we're obligated to do.
Then we are obligated to continue to deliver the water from our other available sources until we expand the plant, and that's how we make up the
Okay.
difference to ourselves.
Thanks so much. And thank you. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Friedman.
Thank you. Some of my questions were answered or asked. So I'll start off. So if the 15% voluntary that the governor proposes, say a year from now, conditions don't change and he puts in a 15% mandatory, what does 15% mean for us? Because as has been reflected, since 2013, we've been at a 25% reduction, where a lot of communities went back up. So their 2020 is the same as 2013. So what percentage would that actually be? 25% plus what?
Good question, Councilmember Friedman. Thank you. You're exactly right. So our demand really hasn't rebounded since the last drought. And so if we were asked to conserve 15% compared to a 2020 baseline, that would be looking at like 35 to 37% compared to 2013 pre-drought demands. And so we've done that before. We did in 2016, we got to up to 40% conservation. But in that time period, we were looking at bans on pretty much all irrigation of turf. So it would be a hard hit for our community.
And that was for that 1 year, but this could be prolonged, so that's a high bar to do kind of for multiple years if we had to go that far.
That's correct. And that's why we continue, as Ms. Wood described, to dialogue with both DWR and water board officials to help them try to understand what that means for a water agency like Santa Barbara that has continued to conserve.
And when you have been discussing with them, as well as you referenced our state legislators, so for that 15%, getting back to the reduction, we are different in terms of we have a 25% reduction already, but we also have desal, which is about would you say like a quarter of our supply or so of 3,000 acre feet?
35%.
Yeah. How much?
35%. Yeah.
So almost a third of our supply, which is non-state type of water. Plus we have about, as I understand, 10% is recycled water. Again, a non-state type of water use. And then, so we have those, so our conservation efforts are significant. They're approaching 50% if you're talking about a statewide, because we're using local sources. What has their reaction been to that when you put those percentages in that number and saying, we're close to 40, 50% of reduction already?
So unfortunately, to be honest with you, they haven't been very receptive. What we're hearing, and it starts at the governor's office, he actually, right before the water board meeting on May 24th, met with, like, I don't remember how many, but I want to say like the big 10 water agencies in the state: Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, San Diego County Water Authority, East Bay Mud up north. And the tenor of the meeting was fairly threatening. He's frustrated that he's not seeing the 15% reduction statewide. And he kind of told the agencies, like, a top-down, targeted approach is coming if you guys can't pull this off.
So now would be a good time to double up our efforts with our state legislators in particular over this course of this year to make that case that we're close to that 40, 50% reduction if you count desal and the other water and recycled and reductions. Okay. And then how does the reduction, how does that impacting our revenues in terms of just overall the revenues, and how do we replace the loss in revenue from that? And in turn, our ability to offer some of these programs, because we're offering these programs to reduce, we have low revenue, we're offering programs to reduce the water, which lowers the revenue, but that's what pays for these programs. So are we seeing revenue losses for this, and how do we account for that?
So currently, we're actually not seeing revenue losses. Our projections are ahead of projected, or our revenues are ahead of projected for the current fiscal year. You're absolutely right that that's kind of the dichotomy of asking for conservation, is that it requires extra cost because we do lose those revenues. And we really pride ourselves in Santa Barbara for having such conservation-oriented rates, meaning that those that use the most pay the most, and those that are efficient and reasonable with their water use pay the least. And in order to continue to have that sort of reinforcement in our rate structure, it does mean that our revenues drop when we ask people to conserve.
Because we have volumetric, and that allows people to have that flexibility on their
Exactly.
bills as well. And then just a couple more questions. In terms of our groundwater supplies, so we used them significantly, our groundwater, in 2012 or 2011 to 2016, and we really haven't had a lot of rainfall to replenish them. So how healthy are our groundwater, in particular in the low-lying areas? Are we able to use those if we need to? And can you speak to a little about if we're seeing any signs that we're getting close to the saltwater intrusion and having to basically take the ones in the low-lying areas out of commission?
So that's another very good question. As you're referring to, we have kind of two primary producing groundwater basins. So below us here in the downtown area, we have Storage Unit 1, and the potential threat there isn't groundwater level. In fact, we have wells right now that are artesianing. So the water is high enough that it's coming out of the ground naturally. But the issue with the Storage Unit 1 water is seawater intrusion. So as we pump our production wells inland, it pulls seawater inside. We track that closely, and we actually, since we turned our wells off in, I believe it was 2017, we have seen a reduction in chlorides. It's slowly moving back out to the coast. And we don't see any increase in chloride concentrations this side of the 101 freeway. So it's still very far away from our production wells, and I'm working with USGS to model this better as we speak, but we have several years of production still in Storage Unit 1 based on our estimates of how that chloride concentration moves through the basin when we pump. And then in the Foothill Basin, the issue isn't chloride concentrations, but it's groundwater levels, and so the water actually drops as we pump it. We have seen some recharge since we've turned off our wells. Even when it doesn't rain very much, there's what's called bank flow. So just like the intrusion that we get in Mission Tunnel, which provides a source of supply for us, there's water slowly percolating through the ground that's refilling our groundwater basin. So we have seen a slight increase in storage in the Foothill Basin. And that's a fairly good-sized basin, and we have several years' worth of groundwater left in there based on our pumping capacities as well.
So they're in pretty decent shape then, that we've been able to rest in the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, the tricky thing is just that recovery is slow. And so if we wanted them to kind of be, fully recovered back to pre-drought conditions, that could take 5 to 10 years, which is what we've been saying now for a couple of years. But we do still have adequate supplies.
And then just two more questions. So I noticed in slide 10 in particular that we don't have any of the supplies that we're looking forward, any state water through CCWA in there, obviously because the state, the allocation's 5%, zero, it's very minimal. But then you referenced that we were able to secure 863 acre feet of water this year, and the market's very, very tough. So being that we have this new tool through state water to just do outright purchases, and assuming there might be some available, anything that we purchase for the Supplemental Water Purchase Program through the Central Coast Water Authority, would that be in addition to what we see here? So it would be just an extra benefit, so it's just banking us? So we're not counting on it, but if we get it, it lessens the impact that we have here?
That's exactly correct. And one nice benefit about purchases or state water project water is it's stored in San Luis Reservoir before we bring it down to Lake Cachuma, and evaporation isn't applied to that water, and so it's to our benefit for any state water. We have, with the new purchase of 863 acre feet of state water, I believe we have close to 1,600 acre feet of state water currently stored in San Luis Reservoir, and it's sitting there and it's protected and it's not evaporating. So it's to our advantage to use Cachuma water first, which is evaporating, and then bring that water down when we need it. So it could offset groundwater usage. There could be different ways that we use it.
So even though that we don't technically have groundwater on that, or sorry, state water on that slide, we do have access to it, however limited, but we do have 1,600 acre feet and potential to purchase some if it's out there, although it would be very difficult because everybody's trying to purchase it, but it's still there.
Correct.
And then my last question is more, the public comes up, is that we're talking about conservation, yet we also, in different meetings, we talk about the need to build more housing. There's hotels that are coming online. How is the contract maybe with the public engagement firm, and what do we say to the public is you need to conserve, but at the same time they're saying, well, you're telling us we need to conserve, but we need to build new housing, we need to build, or there's new hotels that are coming in, those types of things, is you're adding demand, why aren't you stopping demand if you're asking us to cut back? What do we say to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Councilmember Friedman. When we prepared our enhanced urban water management plan in 2020, we worked with community development to look at the new housing requirements and what that would entail in terms of water demand. And so when we're projecting out for what our water demand is going to be in the future, we're anticipating that new housing growth. And anytime that I'm planning for, do we have enough supplies to meet demand, we're incorporating that new demand needed for housing. One thing to note is that new development is very water efficient. Typically, it's mixed use, or it might be large-scale multifamily, which means there's very little landscape. And then all of the fixtures, because of the plumbing and building codes that go in, are very efficient. And so we've looked with community development several times at the impact of new development on water usage, and it's less than 1% of the growth in our demand. Even with what we have projected in the general plan, we're not meeting that target, and it's less than it's projected to be.
So we are taking that into consideration in the modeling that we're doing with this
Absolutely.
enhanced urban water management plan. So thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Ms. Ned.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. I first just want to say you're such a phenomenal team. I know we're doing questions and not comments yet, but it's just what you do to manage this diversified and volatile portfolio, and just to acknowledge the Water Commission also that we all appoint to be on there. There's such a dedicated, knowledgeable group of people, and just remembering Councilmember Jordan when he was on Water Commission as well, bringing that same level of attention to detail, and just want to acknowledge that before the questions. But also the community for their extraordinary conservation, being just a way of life now. So I guess my first question is totally unrelated, but when you mentioned USGS modeling, are you using ModFlow? Or you don't have to answer that.
I'm sorry, I don't remember what
That's
modeling
okay.
platform they're using.
I spent many years of my life groundwater modeling with USGS and ModFlow.
Oh, no, that's for the Santa Clara River.
Okay. It was just a curiosity question, sorry. So could you comment on the need or not to expand desal? You talked a little bit about it, but what does it look like when we think about expanding desal? I'm not sure the public has an image of, does that mean larger buildings? Does that mean more intakes? Does it mean just an additional filter? Or what would expanding physically look like?
That's a good question. So our desal plant was designed to be modular. And it's already, the footprint that's there now, so the space that it occupies, is already, it's not going to expand. And so what would happen if we expanded desal is we'd bring in additional treatment trains. And the treatment trains actually fit within like a semi-tractor, I don't know what the trailer, is that what they're called? And so it's kind of like Legos, it's like plug and play. You decide how much more water you want to produce and you order the trains, and then there's already a footprint at the desal facility for those modular treatment trains.
Thank you. And does it change the intake?
It does not.
Okay, I think that's a really important, thank you for that distinction. And then for the governor's executive order, we don't currently have a target because we don't have a shortage, is that correct? So then what would define a shortage for us in our particular situation?
So in a shortage is when we look out and predict that we won't have enough supplies to meet demands.
And that would be over the next 2 years, or is it a rolling forward?
Yeah, it rolls. We typically look out every 3 years at the beginning of the water year. So now that we're in June, the water year is, what are we, quarter of the way through now? We're kind of in this like 2 to 3 year look ahead, and then we'll update an additional year at the beginning of the water year in October.
So this 2025, the slide 10, where it has the supply gap.
Yeah, that's the additional year.
And we would find different supplies before it got to that year so that we wouldn't have a water shortage.
That's the plan.
presumably.
Or we would need to ask for additional conservation so that we wouldn't have the shortage.
Okay, in some way or another, we would meet that. We're not really in danger of not having enough water. It's just a matter of deciding where it would come from to fill that gap.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then if you could just also comment on how that might impact if we have so many drought-proof supplies, and if there was a blanket demand for reduction of all supplies, then that, if we reduced our drought-proof supplies, that would actually put a demand on our drought-sensitive supplies. Could you just talk a little bit about that, if that's true?
I'm
So-
not sure I entirely
Sorry.
understand your question. I'm sorry.
Well, maybe make sure I understand. So if there was, say, a 30% reduction target imposed on us across the board, and we reduced our desal production by 30%, we would need to be still producing enough water, but it wouldn't come from desal, it would come from our drought-sensitive supplies. Am I understanding that right, or maybe not?
No, I don't think so. So if we needed to reduce demand, we wouldn't reduce supplies that we had control over. So we would continue to produce desalinated water. We would continue to produce and use recycled water, specifically because those are the supplies that are drought-proof and that the city has control over. So those are like kind of our most resilient supplies or reliable supplies. I think what you're getting at came from some of the questions that Councilmember Freeman mentioned, and what he was saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Freeman, but I think I understood this correctly, is that when the state asks us to reduce our water use by 15%, we're saying that we shouldn't have to reduce that portion of our demand that is met by drought-proof supplies. So really, we should only be reducing 15% of our typical state water project use, or those supplies that aren't drought-proof.
Thank you, and I understood that as well.
Okay.
Also, yeah, no, thank you. And if we did do that, I think what I heard you say is we'd have to reduce demand in some way.
Yeah, so there's two ways to meet a shortage. You can reduce demand, so it would be asking for additional conservation. It might look like something like not irrigating turf, or you can increase supplies. And so I think that's also what Councilmember Friedman was getting at, is where can we find those additional supplies? Can we make other purchases, et cetera?
Thank you. And then what is the purchase market like right now? How easy is it to purchase?
It's a little tough because, the state is dry. We were able to secure 863 acre-feet of water. Another thing that adds a layer to this is that there was the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act put in place, and so there's many water agencies across the state that not only might be facing immediate drought conditions, but they need to get their groundwater basins within sustainable levels in the next 20 years. And so the market is getting bought up, for lack of a better term, of people that are trying to secure those supplies. Fortunately, CCWA, or Central Coast Water Authority, as a member, they really go out and work on behalf of all the member agencies, and we've been able to secure some pretty great deals through them.
Fantastic, thank you.
All right, very good. I think my colleagues covered most of my questions. I got to admit, I was a bit distracted by the image of Mr. Jordan watering his blueberries naked. That kind of threw me off here. On slide 18, you talked about in the stage 2, the increased water patrols. And that was something we had discussed many moons ago. And we deferred on doing water patrols and asked instead people to comply, and they did. And I think this was a big part of that effort when we did it back in the day. So what does that entail? And when we did that before, when we had the discussion before, and we did such a our people did a fabulous job of saving, did we employ a consultant back then for our outreach the way we're proposed here today? Ms. Wood, please.
Mayor Rouse, so one thing to keep in mind with that very colorful table is that's actually a drop down from the state, where you have to pick their prescribed text and assign it to a stage. So as you know, we don't do water waste patrols. We have education and we are complaint-based. But that, we were limited, we had to select it and assign it to a stage. So our water waste is still complaint-based and it's not patrolled, yeah.
All right. And then the consultant part too.
And we did have Katz and Associates during the last drought. They were brought on, their first project was about desal water quality. So they've been involved in a variety of water resources projects since probably 2015 or 2016. And the point of the on-call contract is to not have a myriad of multiple contracts to manage, is to have one cap for 5 years of a total amount. And then as projects come along, we work up a scope of work and a purchase order, and we work with them on that project, and then we move on to the next one. It's really just a large on-call contract over 5 years.
Sure. No, I was just so impressed from back then with the efforts of your department and how the results we got from the people in the city, that I thought, well, we should be the consultants, but hey, I'll take your word for it. All right, very good. Are there any public comments from the online?
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, there are no hands raised.
I'm sorry, no hands raised? Okay, very good. We'll go to council comment then, please. Mr. Jordan first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to move B, C, and D just to get it going and then make my comments if you want. Thanks.
Okay, moved and seconded by, okay, just go ahead and comment on the motion, please.
Then I just have some free-range thoughts, as most of these you've heard before, but they're in no particular order. The disconnect between the definition at the state level of whatever, turf grass, whatever you're going to call it, and us is troublesome. I think we should be, my opinion is we should be taking steps to make that definition ourselves and moving forward on it. I don't really see, this is so in 4 years, I think this will be the third time we're considering on again, off again turf grass in the roles I've played with the city. And so it's just, there's, unless it's a park, a school, a functional, whatever you're going to define as functional, but I think having just grass to water grass and cut it to water grass to cut it again in this day and age of water is just not a sustainable future, and I'd like to see us get in front of that. I also think just more thought should be given to, if not strictly structuring it within our stages, just our ability to start to put a numerical number on when we think we're going to have a shortage and what our reduction is. When you look down that menu, those pages, those 3 or 4 pages of 1 through 4, and the ranges on the return, and yeah, if everybody does all the 0 to 1%, we'll get 1% for each one of those, and it's kind of like you don't get to anything really tangible on a one-line item until you get to stage 4. And so when I think what's really needed is people to see a number they're chasing rather than 3 pages of a menu to try and figure out which one can I be and which one can I do. And I just think we're there. I just think we're constantly there, that despite the gains we've had in the past, I think our future is still in a lower overall water use. And the way to get there is to let's pick a number and let's get there, 5% less or 10% less, and let's do what we need to get there. And then, this is just my once a year time to say something, because I know you guys are on this all the time, but that what I call the pinch of the Montecito Water District obligation, and when we get to having to decide to put an expansion project down at Charles Meyer, just seems like we need to be watching that pretty closely so we don't get behind it, and you and I that live here have to bear the brunt of water reduction for our own personal use until the project gets done, because we started it too late and we're still meeting that Montecito obligation. It'd be a terrible thing to have too much water, right? So, and then, you know, I love bar graphs. So it always bothers, well, it frequently bothers me when we put conservation on a supply chart, okay? Conservation to me is at best a gap that has to be chased, because we don't, it's not really supply until afterwards, right? And so I just, particularly when we get out to that 2025 year, and it's like conservation of 2,000 acre feet a year, which is a pretty big chunk. So that to me is not a supply. It's a gap, it's an issue, it's a problem, it's a challenge to chase. It's an assumption, I guess, and I don't like a supply being linked with an assumption. And then I think somebody snuck in a couple comments about the message, the public relations aspect. And this line really bothers me, that we do not include a water reduction target since the city is not currently in a water shortage. And that's just kind of like saying, well, we have ours, and we don't need to do better if we can, because we certainly do. We don't need to waste water even if it's ours. And I think we need to play with the messaging on that, that even though we're saying we have water for 2 years, that doesn't mean you need to be washing a car in the driveway. And I know that's one of the things on the list. I'm just using that as a quick example. And then also to Councilmember Friedman's point, you know, I recollect the last time I saw the number, the new development, according to the general plan numbers, was like 0.7 acre feet a year, some obscenely low number. And I think that comes up all the time now, and it's going to come up all the time more as we embark upon this path the next 2 years. And I think you need to figure out a way to get that into the public relations part too, that we just continue to hammer the fact that it's a real low number, the economic and community benefits that development brings in replacing old stuff with new stuff and having new stuff, and also that, you know, that unit compared to my 1965 home toilet is like Star Wars apart from each other in terms of water use, and just keep hammering on that message. And then something also missing usually in our efforts too is proactively addressing up front the message that that there are so many static costs or expenses that are inherent in water that have nothing to do with water consumption and what I'm paying on my bill. And so, of course, what people see is I'd ask you to conserve water by 10 or 15% a year, but my rates are going to go up 10 or 15% every year too. They just don't get that connection. And so I am happy to see the Mike Jordan dollar bill on some of those things, but I think somewhere you need to work into that message too visually on what the static costs of water, both water treatment and water generation, that aren't really affected by the amount of water that you use, that they're still there regardless of the amount of water that you use, so that you know, the last two things I talked about, those are things to keep me from just having to answer angry emails and people in the line at the grocery store. But people just don't get it. And I think if we're going to pay a couple $100,000 over 5 years for somebody to help us with that messaging, I think we ought to work on people starting to get it a little better. So that's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Friedman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Corey and staff, for all the work that you put into this. I know that it takes a lot of effort and just a lot of planning over, you know, every day to look at conditions, reassess, and come up with the urban water management plan, our drought plan. So I just really appreciate it. And I know the charts that we've had here have been revised many times, and none has been perfect, but we're as close as we're going to get, and I think they show a good picture. So I just want to appreciate all the work you do, and also want to Appreciate the public who has continued to conserve 25% over the last almost decade, which has translated into real savings that we have now. We wouldn't be in the position we are at Lake Cachuma with having a 2-year water supply in Lake Cachuma and not having to rely on the 1,600 acre feet in Central Coast Water Authority if we hadn't conserved that. So, while technically, to Councilmember Jordan's point, it's not technically a water supply. Once it's conserved, it becomes a water supply. So, great job to the public for that. But we have a rougher road ahead as a state, and even though we're in a unique circumstance, we're not immune to it. So the more we can continue to plan, the better. So one thing I'd like to stress is the communication with not only the state board, but our legislators, and including those who will most likely be there next year, and to have those conversations now as they're planning for the next assembly, and just to continue to have that conversation with them, to press upon them the actual conservation that we have on local. What it means for us is we have the 25%, we have the 10% in our recycled water, we have the desal, which again is about a third. So we're getting close to 50% of our own local sources. So regardless, if we cut back 15% of those, it makes no impact in the state water supply situation. And so to the extent that we can impress it upon them to advocate for us, if we need to improve our efforts or enhance our efforts as a council, or appoint some of us to have those types of meetings and conversations with our state legislators, and look at, is there an opportunity for when you have desal or other types of projects to get some type of credit for them, because we might miss it. We might have an opportunity if we do have to expand the desal, and have that conversation in a year from now, where you'd be going from about 3,100 or 3,000 acre feet to 5,000, rounded off. That's 2,000 acre feet that perhaps if we have those conversations, we could get a credit for that in some type of way, and rather than just doing it and asking, can we get a credit later? So maybe there's something that the state could recognize, that we're being proactive to take that load off of the state and get some type of recognition for that, especially if it comes into a mandatory 15%, which very well could happen a year from now. And then the desal, I agree, we just need to continue to monitor that and how that plays out. And the last thing is the public relations campaign. I think it's needed. One, to message it. It is hard to understand that we're in a statewide drought, but we're in a good situation, but we want to be proactive. But also what we can do now to encourage more people in the coming year in particular to do conversions of lawns, to use that messaging, and then also the issue of new housing development and what that means for us. Yeah, it adds a little bit of the water, but there are also other benefits that we get of having our workforce live here and not having to commute, if they were commuting, they'd still be using the water while they're here. So to have the opportunity for them to live in newer apartments, newer condos that take less water, use less water, but have them live here, there's other benefits to just the water. So I think that all needs to be folded into the campaign, but I'm glad that we're going to be moving that forward. So thank you again for all the work you do.
Ms. Sneddon?
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. I will just reiterate, too, that you are a phenomenal team. It's something that just every time you come and how much detail and care you give to all of this in keeping our water supplies secure. To the comments about the extraordinary conservation and what the community has borne since the 80s, since before, I think it's pretty clear when we're looking at the California Drought Monitor map, when we're looking at the Gibraltar rainfall. Climate change is here. It's not a matter of if or when. It's here, and now we're in the stages of mitigating and planning. So I don't think any of us see those charts reversing or going in a different direction. And it's measurable, tangible, and it's something that Councilmember Jordan has talked about for a long time, and I think we've agreed on about, when do we start talking about the new normal and the conservation. Even though I can see why we need to keep that marker in there to show the community, to show the governor's office, to show the public at large what it is that we're doing to make up that deficit. I do think that the description of it as a projection and not a supply is a good one, that it's an amount of water that we're not using, but it's not necessarily an amount of water that we could get back. And we would never expect that the community would use that much water again. We've sort of moved away from that direction. So I know it's something we continue to struggle with, how to talk about that extraordinary conservation, and it is extraordinary what the community has been able to do. I think we're ready for these stage 2 actions. We've seen them coming. We do careful planning. We have the enhanced urban water management plan. We have the water shortage. We're ready, and I think the community's ready and has been actually asking for when we were going to start to implement some drought action. So I think it's time, and it's imposed on us, but we're ready, and it's nothing that we wouldn't have already thought of. I think just another word on potable reuse of water and the concept of one water, and it's something that we've been talking about, and I think one of these days we're just going to be astonished that we flushed potable water down the toilet or, sprayed potable water on ornamental turf or anything else like that. I'm not sure how much the public is aware of how much goes into every drop of potable water. You have chemicals that are increasingly expensive, hard to find, supply chain issues. I mean, that's not when you turn on your tap and it's potable water. So much goes into, so much cost and energy and effort going into all of those droplets of water. So as we're conserving and thinking about those projections, just really reiterating that the one water concept that I think the community is more and more ready for, and potable reuse at some point. For the development question, and I think since it's come up in comments, to me it is like spending in a deficit. We're planning and accommodating for what needs to be built, but it's being built on what already is that extraordinary conservation. So it's like we haven't filled the deficit yet, and we're building more. I think if it's for local workforce housing, it's worth it because that decreases our impacts to climate change. But if it's for more hotels or more travel or vacation homes, I don't see that trade-off is worth it. And I'll just add that as a comment here, that not all development is equal in terms of water usage and the worthwhile trade-off of that. I just want to finish by saying thank you. I always have confidence that when something new is coming from the governor or something new in the state, that we're ready. And it's with such confidence that I'm happy to be supporting these recommendations.
Thank you. So I had this conversation with Senator Lamone on Friday, and she's very aware of her situation and how patently unfair percentage baselines really are when somebody's been doing the right thing the whole time, and there's a broad brush of just one size fits all, which is how government tends to roll. So, but I'm certainly hoping that as we go forward with our communications, that we don't consider punitive measures first, that we consider cooperative measures first, as we did before, because we got an amazing amount of cooperation from our staff. And if your track record is any indication, I think that's the direction we're going. So, and then the last thing is, we will need our talking points as we look at different housing developments and whatnot for their, not only their water budget, but their wastewater projections as well. Because as Ms. Stead said, that is a question we get asked a lot every time, every day, about the demand for housing development and whatnot. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and I'll entertain, oh, actually, there is a motion on the floor already. And we're ready for a vote if there are no more comments. So Ms. Kovacs, if you would, please.
So the motion was to pass 17B, C, and D. Councilmember Jordan?
Yes.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez?
Yes.
Councilmember Friedman?
Yes.
Councilmember Sneddon?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Harmon?
Yes.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez?
Aye.
Mayor Rouse?
Aye. Thank you very much. We need to take a short break for our translators before the next item, and I think Ms. Harmon is also going to be taking off after this, so we'll be back in 10 minutes. Veen. And Madam Clerk, would you read the next item?
Item 18 is adoption of resolution and award of contract for conceptual design of the terminal expansion and parking structure at the Santa Barbara Airport.
All right.
Item 18B is to adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending resolution number 21-045, adopting the budget for fiscal year 2022 to appropriate funds for conceptual design of the terminal expansion and parking structure at the Santa Barbara Airport.
Thank you. And very good. We'll have a staff report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and council members. I'm Sarah Isa. I'm the Land Development Manager at Santa Barbara Airport. I'm relatively new to the role. I've been at the airport since December 2021, and before that at Public Works for approximately 7 years. But then even prior to that, I was at the airport for 5 years as a planner. So I'm glad to be back. I wanted to also mention that our interim airport director, Brian DeMora, is on a longstanding planned family vacation. So we have a few more items coming before council this summer, and we're really glad to kick this one off before you today, is the contract for the conceptual design of the terminal expansion and parking structure at the airport. And presenting will be Mr. Brad Cleansing, supervising engineer. He's in the Public Works Department, but he's stationed out at the airport. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. As Sarah said, my name is Brad Cleansing. I'm the supervising engineer at the airport, and I will be taking you through the majority of the slides. Starting off, I wanted to highlight on this slide our 2011 terminal. It highlights the Spanish colonial revival, and it's that great welcome to the city of Santa Barbara. Whether you're visiting or returning home, getting off the plane, you see in the glass jet bridges, the mountains on one side and the ocean on the other. I think it's a great welcome to the city that we're going to try to keep intact with the terminal expansion. Also wanted to highlight the conceptual design, so that we are going to do a phased design approach. We'll have the conceptual, the design development, and then the final design as well. And then also that we have 2 projects built into here, the terminal expansion and the parking structure. We felt it was imperative that these 2 projects were designed together for at least the concept stage. We didn't want one project to get in the way of another one, and future growth as well to be coordinated. As a reminder, the airport is only 8 miles away from downtown Santa Barbara. We are surrounded by the city of Goleta, the county of Santa Barbara, as well as the UCSB. 2011 was the last major capital project that addressed commercial capacity. Since 2011, we've received 27% growth, and per our 2017 airport master plan, we expect at least 79% growth by 2032. That figure, or the photo on your right, shows a recent morning at the Santa Barbara Airport, and you can see that this is on the main floor, and it's a queued space where our TSA security checkpoint is beyond capacity. So we've had to, and this is pretty common, that at least a couple times during the week, where we're queuing folks up here, and it even has come out of the building at some point. So the terminal expansion and the parking structure is addressing current demand. And that current demand was evaluated in the master plan and the EIR. And then on July 19th, we plan to come back and look for the recommendation to award contract on the master plan update. Generally, we update the master plan every 5 years or so. Here's a bird's eye view of the terminal area. And this is a reproduction of what was in the 2007 master plan. So the green area is what we would call the Southfield area, and it's generally where we're going to add additional parking. And then the blue and the orange areas are where we had planned terminal expansion. Just for this conceptual design, we're looking at the blue area as far as terminal expansion, and then the orange area would be future growth. In preparation of the parking and terminal expansion, we are going to be doing what we call the Southfield redevelopment, and that'll be happening in the fall timeframe. We'll come back to council when we're a little further along in design and construction as far as advertisement for that. But basically, it's the area between the blue and the green areas where the rental cars are located, and there's that hangar 5 that we call, and that area will be reconfigured. The general design elements for both projects, as mentioned earlier, will be completed in multiple phases. We'll have to evaluate traffic, parking, circulation, airline passenger, airline scheduling. We'll also be looking at some FAA requirements as far as height obstructions with the runways, and then we'll be interviewing multiple stakeholders. As far as the architectural, the big one is the Spanish colonial revival. We are going to be matching that with the expansion. The green building policy, we are going to be complying with the latest policy there, looking at net zero carbon design. Solar will be integrated, as is battery backup. And then ParkSmart is listed there for those not familiar with that. That's basically the LEEDs equivalent for parking structures. Specifically for the terminal expansion, we're looking to add 2 additional gates, and then the waiting room space, or we call hold rooms, and then additional food and beverage and retail space for that second floor. And then the first floor will be taking another look at the ticketing, self-check-in, the TSA security area, and improving the baggage claim area. For the parking structure, we envision a multi-level structure. The height will be restricted by FAA guidelines, and we're targeting between 800 and 1,400 parking spaces. Right now, we have an overflow lot north of Hollister that's a little over 500 spaces. So the idea is to make those spaces more available closer to the terminal and provide some additional room for growth. The rental car ready return operations, that'll be an improved process. Potentially the existing customer service counters would be relocated to the parking structure. And then, of course, we will add electric vehicle charging to the parking structure. At the end of the conceptual design, the main deliverable will be 3 different site layouts and configurations that we will we'll bring before the Airport Commission as well as the council on an update. We did follow the FAA's guidelines for a qualification-based selection process. What this helps ensure is that we are eligible for funds down the road from whether it's new infrastructure laws or the AIP grant process, and the AIP is the Airport Improvement Program. The panel consisted of airport staff as well as staff member from Sustainability and Resilience. We received 3 proposals. We interviewed all 3 proposals, and Corrigan Associates was the highest rated firm. Corrigan Associates is an international design firm. The Los Angeles-based design team is going to be headed by John Mayers. He has over 30 years in project management, a variety of projects including aviation. Most recent were at Long Beach Terminal improvements, as well as John Wayne Airport. Included with their design team is 196 Architects, formerly known as PMSM, and the 2011 terminal architect, Fred Sweeney. He's going to be a part of this project as well. HNTB is the civil engineers for this project, and they were also members of the 2011 terminal. And Bueller Parking Studio, they will be in charge of the parking structurally and as well as traffic flows. Some of the past projects for this design team, in the upper left, that is the Long Beach Terminal Improvement Project. It is also a historic terminal, so they are familiar with working through that challenge. The upper right is the South Padre Island. It's a new terminal. It was roughly 89,000 square feet, and as a reference, our current terminal is about 70,000 square feet, excuse me. And the lower right, that is at Dallas Love Field. That is a 5,000 parking space parking structure. It had the ParkSmart certification. And then on the lower left, hopefully that is familiar, that is our existing terminal. And while Corrigan was not involved with that design, we do have 19.6 and HNTB. So the RFQ went out in November of '21. We went to the Airport Commission in May, and we anticipate a roughly 6-month schedule for this conceptual design before we will negotiate a fee for the design development and further design, steps of design. Regarding the budget, we were going to fund this initial step through airport reserves. The next steps of design, we are going to be exploring the FAA grant funding, or the Airport Improvement Program, or the new bipartisan infrastructure law. Each of these are providing roughly $3 million each year, although there is eligibility criteria, so we won't be able to allocate all of that money for the various parts of the design. And then the customer facility charge is going to be targeted at the parking structure. And that's a program where we accept a small fee for each vehicle rented out. And then through design, conceptual design, we'll be refining the cost of construction. Right now, ballparks are about $90 million for both structures. And when you factor in the design costs and the construction supports, we're looking at $100 million. And then I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Klinsing. Wanted to touch on environmental review for the project. I did want to emphasize that both of these projects were included in the 2017 master plan for the airport. So both projects have already received CEQA review, unless we go above and beyond what was contemplated in the master plan, and we're not anticipating that. Again, this is a demand-based project, so we've already triggered by our employments the demand to require these expansions. Also, the project will require a coastal development permit from the coastal, well, it's actually from the city, and it can be appealed to the Coastal Commission. And then it will require a federal environmental assessment per the NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act. And that process would commence at about 25% design. So we would get started with that once we receive our conceptual designs and select one. And we will leave you with the recommendations for today, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, very good. Questions from council. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple. So in your executive summary, you referenced the 2017 Airport Master Plan, and that was looking at the next 20 years. And so it's already 5 years later, and your project's going to be completed in 2028, which is like 11 years into your 2017 master plan. So is that normal? Do you feel like you're behind the curve because of that? Is there a way to speed it up? So that picture you showed of people having to stand around in places other than they can be where they should be, can it be accomplished quicker, or is this just the way these things work of this scope?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Jordan, we will be coming before council in July, actually, to kick off the master plan update, which will be looking at the next 20 years. And to answer your question, we are behind. So we could have built this project a few years ago.
Okay.
And we're going to be moving as fast as we can once we get the contract approved. So.
And then I know, well, I don't know, I just presume that, handshake deals with airlines are exactly that. They pull out at a whim, or they come back with great fanfare. And so that number that you had on there, like 77% of increased employment through some date. How do you, I don't know, how do you reconcile spending $100 million with the hope that, well, I guess the connection of both my desire to fly out of Santa Barbara Airport and that there will be a carrier there to help with that desire? Is that just hope?
Councilmember Jordan, this is a demand-based planning, so we've already reached the demand, and we have several methods for very sophisticated forecasting, both regionally and nationally and internationally for aviation. And all of those signs are pointing towards more and more
Okay.
aircraft. That said, we don't have any control over who comes and who leaves.
Fair enough.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you very much.
Further questions from council? I had one. So the airport's, the new parking structure project, is that where Atlantic Aviation is currently, the FBO? So that will be moved over as part of, are they already in the process of moving over? And is that a separate set of permits and plans and all the above?
Yeah, yes, Mayor Rouse. So Atlantic is in the process of relocating right now. They have a building permit to move to the north side of the airfield. And the new parking structure, while it may not affect the building, the actual Atlantic building, the apron space is where we intend to build the parking structure.
And the last question is on runway 15 LNR, does this plan anticipate removing one of those lanes on that runway?
So this current project, the terminal expansion and parking structure, does not look at that, but the airport master plan update will look at that as an alternative, as
Okay.
it did in 2017.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Any comment or whatever from council at this point in time? If not, what? Do we have public comment? I think we do.
There's no public comment.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I will entertain a motion. Mr. Friedman.
I think I just want to thank staff. I know there's a lot of work that goes into this at the Airport Commission and going through all that, and I know it's going to come back. So looking forward to some of these improvements as we increase demand and get our new our carriers in there, continue to be there. So just want to say that. And with that, I will move the staff recommendation A and B.
Moved by Friedman.
I'll second.
Second by Alejandro Gutierrez. Mr. Jordan, to the motion.
Just no, but I just have a tangent remark. I'm sorry not to see Brian here today. I had occasion to catch last week's commission meeting, and the airport's been of an interest to me for a couple of years at least, since I've sat in this chair, and there was just such a marked, I hope he's watching, I'm sorry he's not here today, there's just such a marked change in words, manners, actions, and collaboration between the public and the Airport Commission, particularly affecting the private flyers. And I think great strides have been made there, and that has every benefit to working hand in hand with exactly what you guys are working on for commercial air, because it involves the community too. And I'm really sorry Brian's not here today, because I really wanted to thank him for that, because I heard many people say it was a result of his interim tenure there that led to that. So if you hear from him, pass that along. Thanks.
Thank you, I will.
All right, very good. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Madam Clerk, if you would, please.
Excuse me, Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez,
Yes.
Councilmember Friedman,
Yes.
Councilmember Snedden,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Harmon, Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez,
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan,
Yes.
and Mayor Rouse.
Aye. All right, very good. Resolution passes. Thank you very much to staff. And we will go to council member committee assignment reports. Ms. Snedden.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. This week attended our Creeks Commission. They're analyzing microplastics and street sweeping and Laguna Channel tracking, including the groundwater. And then also their education and outreach was an update on that. So their PSAs, Adopt a Beach, Earth Day, Creek Week is coming in September, youth watershed education programs. They do so much. And then we had a State Street ad hoc committee meeting. We're really focusing on recommendations that will be coming to council next week. I've been meeting with stakeholders and continuing to do that. Our homeless ad hoc committee met. We're also continuing to meet with stakeholders on that. Attended your mayor's cleanup event. That was fantastic, really, really fun. And also attended the Juneteenth celebration, which was very well attended and celebrated.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman.
I think I attended the Park Foundation board meeting and the Airport Commission and the Coastal Cities Group Leadership Committee had our monthly meeting, and we also held a webinar in conjunction with the Coastal Commission, hosted it, and we participated in it, myself and some of my colleagues on the Coastal Cities Group, and it had to do with sea level rise and local coastal planning. And there's a link available on the League of Cities website to that webinar. It's about an hour and a half with some Q&A, and it gets into local coastal planning and the grants that are available right now from via the Coastal Commission for local coastal planning updates. So it was pretty informative, and it's something we've been working on with that group for quite some time. And we're going to use that to go into the August 12th Coastal Commission meeting. We're having a local government workshop that day where we'll be down in Calabasas with the full Coastal Commission and our committee. That's going to build upon the webinar that just took place. Thank you.
Okay, this past Friday, I attended an SB CAG event, which was the opening of the on-ramp and the carpool lane in Carpinteria, finishing that part of the project off. And Congressman Carbajal was there, along with Senator Monique Limon, other council members, as well as supervisors. So that was a pretty well-attended event, and SB CAG staff will be coming here to present to us, I think, sometime in, I think it's August, if I'm not mistaken, right? To catch us up on all the changes, including the eventual, my favorite fantasy, which is that southbound on-ramp at Cabrillo, which hopefully will happen in my lifetime. And then I went to a Work Incorporated luncheon that afternoon and saw the folks that you normally see down at the harbor doing a lot of our cleanup work and whatnot, and they're very excited about us paying attention to them and going to their luncheons and whatnot, and they were very, very gracious as hosts. And then I wrapped up my evening with a ride-along with our finest, our Santa Barbara Police Department. It was a really interesting evening. Really was impressed at the level of professionalism and the kind of care these people take when they're interacting with our various clients on the streets and a few people that we had to deal with that night. So very exciting thing to do. I think Mr. Freeman, you're signed to do one, and Mr. Jordan, I think you are too. You, Ms. Ned is going to as well. So I recommend it for anybody and everybody. I don't know, Ms. Gutierrez, you probably kind of have it in your family anyway, but it is it's pretty impressive, and it's very impressive to go along and see just how our folks do with the public out there. So, and with that, I believe we stand adjourned.